Good morning and welcome to Rising. What we have for you today is a show, and you're about to watch it. Hello, Niall.
Hello, Robby. Thank you for that very enthusiastic introduction.
It's an important clarification.
Sticking to the facts.
Indeed.
Glad to say that.
Just the facts, that's what people come here for.
Well, and a little bit of opinion too.
Little
So, on that topic, Robby,
Yes.
what's on your radar?
Tiny bit of opinion for you. Regular viewers of MSNBC were treated to quite the surprise on Monday morning when Morning Joe co-host Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski revealed that they had visited Mar-a-Lago and spoken to Donald Trump for 90 minutes. That's right, the famously anti-Trump pair who have claimed that Trump was engaged in something approaching fascism, if not outright fascism, went to go hang out with that fascist. Explaining their decision to viewers, Mika said this: "For those asking why we would go speak to the president-elect during such fraught times, especially between us, I guess I would ask back, why wouldn't we?" And guess what? I think, this might be the first time I've ever said this, Mika Brzezinski makes a valid point. Journalists, other media figures, and political pundits should be in conversation with political figures on both sides of the aisle, even if they find their policies distasteful or profoundly wrong-headed. Refusal to meet with the other side is exactly how echo chambers develop. It's unhealthy, and it contributes to a monoculture in the media, in which the mainstream progressive elites who speak for major media institutions don't understand the other half of the country. But maybe Morning Joe viewers are experiencing whiplash. After all, Scarborough and Brzezinski have attacked other members of the media for, quote, normalizing Donald Trump. Now they're doing the same, and in turn are facing some unhinged attacks from their own colleagues and media allies. Katie Phang, an MSNBC host, wrote on X this morning that, quote, normalizing Trump is a bad idea, period. Now, she did not mention Joe and Mika, but it was a clear response to them. MSNBC contributor Jennifer Rubin said the meeting with Trump was disgusting. She also later called for a boycott of that program on the network she works for. We'll see how long that lasts. And other unnamed MSNBC employees told Fox News that Joe and Mika were cynical opportunists for abandoning their previous anti-Trump stance. Now, to be fair, it's not exactly wrong to call them cynical opportunists. Joe and Mika have read the writing on the wall, and they know that MSNBC is hemorrhaging viewers, and that hyperbolic, emotional, fatalistic coverage of Trump will not win them new viewers. Trump just won a massive victory, a bigger victory than in 2016. There just aren't enough Americans who are persuaded that Donald Trump is a fascist and are going to tune in to a flailing television news channel to hear more about that. If they feel that way, they're either already watching or they're so depressed and de-energized that they want to tune the news out. Mika and Joe are pivoting not because they've suddenly become open-minded and interested in hearing from diverse perspectives, but because they know their perspective isn't profitable enough. Still, I say it's better to broaden your horizons for cynical reasons than to not broaden them at all. The View's lone right-of-center voice, Alyssa Farah-Griffin, agreed with me and said so yesterday in a segment. She said, "I've heard a lot of folks on the left coming after Joe and Mika saying, don't normalize him. Well, 75 million plus Americans voted to normalize Donald Trump by making him president-elect." She was met with stunned silence from her colleagues, and then finally, Sunny Hostin chimed in with this excellent take.
The bottom line is that America needs a free press that is willing to speak truth to power right now, more than ever. And I think that we have to be very clear-eyed when we think about the president-elect and cover the president-elect. And I don't think you need to sit down for 90 minutes at Mar-a-Lago and kiss his ring to be able to speak truth and to be able to cover a story. So maybe they're not journalists in the true sense. Maybe they're saying that they're opinion journalists. But we have to remember that Trump is the guy who ushered in the era of fake news. He is the guy who ushered in alternative facts. He is the guy who attacked 3 black female journalists. He's the guy that revoked Jim Acosta's press credentials for asking him a question. And so I think that this president-elect, I hate to say it, would like nothing more than to have only Fox News cover him, would like nothing more than a state-sponsored media. And I don't think he can be trusted in the way that other presidents can be trusted.
So the problem with all that is if the media figures adopted the hostage strategy and refused to engage with Trump, well, then he would only make greater use of conservative and sympathetic media. Refusal to engage with the other side is how we get media silos, with half of the country unable and unwilling to talk to people who disagree with them or to consume news sources that tell them what they don't want to hear. That's what we have normalized. It's going to take a lot of work to fix it. We're trying to fix it on Rising every day, but an establishment that is less inclined toward knee-jerk or blind panic about every single thing Trump says and does, and is even willing to meet with him and hear him out, might actually win back some trust. Now, there was some additional reporting, Niall, this morning that I saw from Brian Stelter, who writes the Reliable Sources newsletter for CNN, and he says that, let me find it. Well, he said that they were scared of retribution, and that's why they decided to meet with him, which was almost would be worse if they're cowardly meeting with him so he doesn't hurt them, although I should note that it would be totally wrong, and I'm absolutely against Donald Trump or anyone else in government or politics using their power against the media. Some of Trump's worst moments have come from not criticizing the media. He's free to do that. He can exercise his own First Amendment rights to inveigh against the media, and in fact, for all the pearl clutching over that, Democrats, Biden, Obama, Kamala people have done plenty of criticizing of the media. That's fine, but using the actual power of the office against the media would be bad.
Well, I agree with that. To the point of unorthodoxy, we're in an unorthodox situation here because I think, am more critical of Joe and Mika than you are in this case. Now, I think that you make a good argument about the individual cases that should be made in terms of how we cover Trump, right? And so there are questions about how one best does that. There are also views of Trump that are in isolation defensible, whether one agrees with them or not. The problem I have with Joe and Mika is what I see as just the blatant fraudulence of it. It is possible, whether people agree with it or not, to argue that Donald Trump is an authoritarian and poses a danger to democracy. It is defensible, whether people agree with it or not, to say you should talk to anyone who is, democratically elected president. That is an important part of journalistic sourcing. What is implausible to me is to flip from one to the other the moment it appears to be to your advantage to do so, and then claim some high-minded principle for doing so. I think Mika Brzezinski made some remark about how there had been 5 years of political warfare that she and Joe were heroically going to provide balm to the nation. And I just think that's such a ridiculous cover on what's just a move made out of self-interest.
Well, you're not wrong. What can I say? You're not wrong. However, I tend to be, I'm a forgiving person.
Yes.
And if you flip your position and you flip it to be more in line with, what I think is the way to conduct yourself, then I might still make fun of you as you do it, but I'll be glad to see it, and I'll be glad to see more measured, more temperamentally measured coverage, because I don't think the media should pull their punches. I intend fully to exhaustively criticize the Trump administration if they do things I disagree with. We've been parsing the appointments, and I am worried about neoconservatism getting laundered back into the administration from some of these picks. We're going to talk about the mass deportation plan a little bit later on the show. I have a lot of questions about that, including how you can do that while also winding down the administrative state, the vast federal bureaucracy, letting go of all the federal workers that the kind of more libertarian-minded people like Vivek want to do. I'm for that. I'm not for ramping up a police state to deport people, and those two ideas are in tension, and we're going to talk about that later on the show. But people will only... The idea that you just scream fascist 10 more times, that's going to solve it. It's just that idea is so thankfully discredited now, I think.
The other point I would say allied to that is I just think that a lot of the coverage about how to cover Trump just overcomplicates the matter. You cover the person rigorously but fairly. If you think something is worth criticizing, you criticize it. You try to avoid hyperbole or exaggeration. And that phrase that is often used and was used in some of the clips there about normalizing him, I mean, just write or speak what he does. And right. if you're in our business where there's more opinion involved, you can give your opinion, and if you're in the very straight news business, you shouldn't. But it becomes, I think, this endless sort of media incestuous conversation about, it's so difficult to cover this guy. He's a public figure.
Frankly,
you cover him like a public figure.
And frankly, they don't have the reach and the ability anymore to do some kind of blackout where they don't normalize him because he's just totally ignored and deplatformed and kept off the airways. There are times where they, I think, forgot they being mainstream large media institutions, when they'll not show a Trump speech or something because what he's saying is lies or is untrue. So we can't. It would be wrong to subject our viewers, to even that. So we're not going to air it. Well, like, people who want to see this then they can go on Twitter and they can find it being live streamed in real time. Like, the idea that just because you're not covering it doesn't mean you've managed some sort of blackout. We live in a fragmented media ecosystem there are drawbacks to that. There are also positives to that. And the era where you could a handful of large organizations could decide what is normal and what is not, we don't live in that world anymore. And I would say that's mostly for the better, but there are bad things about it too. They're going to have to get used to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
More Rising right after this. Stay with us. Big show today. We're going to talk about lots more, including, as alluded to previously, the mass deportation scheme. We're going to have a debate and discussion about it because we don't want you to live in some media silo. We want to represent multiple sides of every problem. More Rising coming up after this. Well, there's some potentially explosive news about Matt Gaetz that may or may not derail his nomination to be the Attorney General. Now, for more than 2 years, claims of sexual misconduct have swirled around the congressman. In fact, they were the subject of a House ethics investigation. It's a report that House Leader Mike Johnson said would not be released since Representative Gaetz stepped down from his position.
But now a lawyer for 2 of the women who testified to a congressional panel is speaking out. Joel Leppard told this to NBC News.
Observed to her right her friend, who was 17 at the time, having sex with Representative Gaetz. They were leaned up to what she described to as a game table.
The lawyer also told NBC News that one of the women testified to the congressional panel that she witnessed Gaetz having sex with her then underage friend in 2017. Let's watch that.
She testified that her belief was that Representative Gaetz had no knowledge that she was under 18, that she was 17 years old at the time he was having sex with her. She also testified that when Representative Gaetz found out that she was underage, that they stopped their sexual relationship.
The lawyer said that his clients want America to know this happened and that it's real. Now, Elon Musk, one of Trump's leading advisors, had this to say on X, showing that Gaetz still has the President-elect's support. Matt Gaetz has 3 critical assets that are needed for the AG role: a big brain, a spine of steel, and an axe to grind. He is the Judge Dredd America needs to clean up a corrupt system and put powerful bad actors in prison. Gaetz will be our hammer of justice.
That was Elon Musk's view. Now, the House Ethics Committee is scheduled to meet Wednesday as pressure intensifies on the panel to release their investigative findings about Gaetz. It's a report they've worked on for more than a year. The committee could vote to publish the report, bury it, or share it with senators. Now, per the New York Times, the president-elect has wasted no time in barreling ahead and putting personal pressure on senators. The President-elect Trump has flooded the zone. His approach of flooding the zone to get most, if not all, of his appointments approved. A report just from Politico this morning said that GOP lawmakers have told Trump and his team that Gaetz has, quote, little chance of being confirmed. But will Trump push forward anyway, just to see who is friend and who is foe? And I must say, I have heard from a lot of conservative friends, kind of politically connected people who do not expect Matt Gaetz to get confirmed. I am skeptical that when push comes to shove, he won't be confirmed, because it sounds a lot to me. I think I tweeted something to this effect. The people saying, oh, Matt Gaetz could never get confirmed, sound to me like the same people who said, oh, Donald Trump could never be president again after January 6th. Okay, at no point has there been a off-ramp for any of this, so now we'll see. I think we're 53 is the margin in the Senate, so if Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski and one other people say no, then it's no. Right. And I think at least two of the 3 have already indicated that, but who knows? It's not going to happen.
In terms of the politics of it, my view would be that the Republicans on Capitol Hill have often talked a good game about standing up to President-elect Trump and have typically not done it. I think in the math they would actually need 4, right? Because if it was 3, it would be 50-50 and J.D. Vance could then break the tie.
Correct.
But in any event, the point is, like, will people stand up against this? The other point is just the nature of the allegation. And I know you and I have been careful to say there was a criminal probe into Matt Gaetz and no charges were pressed. We're now at a point where these are testimonies to the House Ethics Committee, but that lawyer who we showed also said that his clients have provided sworn testimony, I believe as part of the criminal probe or to the criminal authorities. Now, that to me does give added heft to these allegations. The chief, or the most creepy one, is this suggestion that he had sex with a 17-year-old, I believe it was 2017, when he would have been in his mid-30s. I mean, that's gross behaviour, and I think that should rule anyone out from being Attorney General or holding any other high office. Whether it in practice does so is a different matter.
Yeah, you know, we are talking about this very carefully because these are allegations. He was the subject of a blackmail attempt, and I tend to be I try to be discerning of various sexual misconduct allegations, particularly when they seem to me to be rounded up to like sex trafficking, as it was for him at one point, because it happened to be on a plane traveling from one jurisdiction to the next. And I will say that, you know, now all of this, we could conclude that all of this is disqualifying to be Attorney General, which that is fair enough. I don't necessarily think it should be a criminal matter, and I would suggest this is uncomfortable to talk about, but in some states in the country it is not, the age of consent is 16 in some states and 18 in others. And as uncomfortable as that is, I don't know where it was and whether it would be a crime. Now, so I don't think it should be a criminal matter, but you don't have to be, it is fine to say someone nominated to be Attorney General should not even have the well, is it 16 or 17? That's a bridge too far.
Well,
I would agree with that.
Yeah, exactly.
If it was found to be. And I would further say that I think there's no reason not to release this report for transparency, for disclosure. I want to let the people decide. Government redacts and hides from us way too much information. You know, we're trying to judge not knowing what's in the report. It could be that the report doesn't have very compelling evidence, and that could be to his credit, or it could be the report is really damning and he was getting out of Congress in time to avoid that scrutiny. So either way, we should see that information. I'm fully for not just the senators. We should all. This is a member of Congress. The American people should be able to see this report. I would say
absolutely, and I think one of the things that adds to the cloud of suspicion over Gaetz, who denies all accusations of wrongdoing, is the fact that he resigned instantly he was nominated to be Attorney General, which in practice has the effect of ending any House ethics investigation because they can't investigate.
He's also accused of, again, what I would say, this is not necessarily any of it I think should be dealt with criminally, but that doesn't mean you need to be the Attorney General.
Right.
The showing or displaying of pictures, of inappropriate pictures, that is just kind of like a workplace thing you should not do, that he is accused of that.
Right.
Again, these are accusations that other Republicans have suggested are true.
Exactly.
This is not just unfair smearing coming from Democrats. Now, that's a lot of negative on him, and I think it is a shame that he has a kind of personal, ethical, legitimate problems, because his policies are, in my view, some of them at least, vastly superior to some other garden variety Republican who could be installed in that position. He has come out very strong on sort of civil libertarian grounds against surveillance issues. He's not a hypocrite on like drug and sex issues. He's been for decriminalizing marijuana possession, moving it off the schedule it is. He's been for pardoning Edward Snowden. These are a lot of good, solid, libertarian or even progressive views that, and then to the just progressive side, I don't actually agree with these views, but one of the reasons I've seen progressives like Glenn Greenwald and Lee Fong and Zed Jilani excited about him is that he's very pro-antitrust. He's defended Lena Khan. He said she's a great member of the Biden team. I'm actually not so amenable to those views, so that's an aspect of him I don't like. But this is interesting ideological individual who would be very different from, I think, just a standard, Republican law and order lawman to be installed in that position.
Yeah.
Someone I would like better than the person likely to be installed in his place. Again, that's not to excuse these various accusations, which if demonstrated with compelling evidence in a report or from testimony, I think are basically disqualifying to serve in this position. But at the end of the day, I do care about the policies more than the person.
I have no objection to a focus on policies to a degree, and I'm not generally comfortable in a sort of moralizing position, but I do think that there are certain lines that just render a person inappropriate to be in the position, particularly if Attorney General, top of the Justice Department, top in effect of the sort of the political side of the legal system. So there's an allegation that he denies that he slept with a 17-year-old. There are allegations that he paid these two women for sex. There are allegations about drug use. Now, you go back a previous generation. Bill Clinton nominated a woman called Zoe Baird to be Attorney General. She failed because she had employed a Peruvian couple, I believe, who were either undocumented or legal here but not eligible to work, to do kind of nanny-type jobs for her. John Tower, who was nominated by H.W. Bush to be Defense Secretary, failed in the Senate with no suggestion of criminality, but suggestions that he was a bit of a boozer and a bit of a womanizer, and that was enough to rule him out. So I think there are things that you don't need, your wrongdoing doesn't need to rise to the level of criminal culpability in order to be an unacceptable choice for the position. And I would argue that Gaetz is pretty much there.
I agree with that, although in both of those cases, I don't know how bad the boozing was. I certainly in the Peruvian nanny case wouldn't have found that disqualifying. We have moved, it is interesting. In some ways, I think we're past the absolute zenith of cancel culture, sort of, people losing their jobs or their scholarships or whatever for ugly things they said when they were kids, or a problematic Halloween costume or whatever. There was probably a time period in the 2018 to 2022 where the only people who weren't going to lose their jobs were politicians who just hang on, who don't face market incentives or public pressure, and can just well, no, I was installed in this position by the voters, and I don't have to go anywhere for 2 or 4 years. The things that the scandal-plagued politicians resigned over 10 or 20 years ago, we just live in a different time. They never resign now. They just power through it. It's remarkable, and I think that's mostly a bad thing. Although I will say some of the okay, you didn't live a perfect life. I'm not saying this applies to Matt Gaetz, but you didn't live a perfect life. No, we're going to have only totally boring, totally. People who have been training to be in the Senate since they were 5 years old. It's a kind of what American psychopath out there satisfies that criteria? Do you know what I mean?
No, I take that point. You want people who have lived life, but you don't want
lived
people
a little bit
who are involved in creepy or predatory behavior, and that's what I think we're debating in Mr. Gaetz's case.
All right, sounds good to me. More Rising coming up next. Lots to talk about today. Tell us what you think about the Matt Gaetz confirmation hearings that are likely to unfold. We'll be back. Each new day brings new picks from President-elect Donald Trump to fill out his cabinet. Trump has nominated Fox News host and ex-congressman, former reality TV star Sean Duffy to lead the Department of Transportation. If confirmed, he will head aviation, automotive, rail, and transit.
President-elect Trump also announced that he wants Chris Wright, a Colorado oil and gas executive who denies that the world faces a climate crisis, to serve as Department of Energy Secretary. But one cabinet position is still hanging in the balance. Trump is seeking new candidates to be Treasury Secretary after his two frontrunners reportedly have found themselves in the midst of internal infighting at Mar-a-Lago. Co-chair Howard Lutnick, who heads up Trump's transition and was head of the investment firm Cantor Fitzgerald, was thought to be a shoo-in. But reports out of Mar-a-Lago have emerged that Lutnick is defying the usual way that you can court favour with Trump by talking to the press and trying to steal the spotlight.
Others are backing hedge fund executive Scott Bessent, and Trump is now looking to former Federal Reserve Governor Kevin Warsh and Apollo Management CEO Mark Rowan. Meanwhile, Trump ally Elon Musk has tapped an outspoken ally of Elon Musk and a critic of big tech, Brendan Carr, to lead the Federal Communications Commission. Carr is currently on the commission. He is on the FCC. This would be to become its permanent head. He also authored aspects of the conservative blueprint Project 2025. In the portion of the document that he was responsible for, Brendan Carr argued that the agency should regulate the largest tech companies such as Apple, Meta, Google, and Microsoft, which I don't think is particularly controversial, but he also said that the agency's top priorities should be, quote, reining in big tech, promoting national security, unleashing economic prosperity, and ensuring FCC accountability and good governance. Carr also wrote on X last week, "We must dismantle the censorship cartel and restore free speech rights for everyday Americans."
President-elect Trump said in a Truth Social statement on Sunday, quote, "Commissioner Carr is a warrior for free speech and has fought against the regulatory lawfare that has stifled Americans' freedoms and held back our economy," end quote. It is important to remember that the FCC has jurisdiction over local TV and radio licenses. Carr was quick to claim that NBC violated FCC rules in October. That was when the broadcaster let the then presidential nominee, Vice President Harris, appear on Saturday Night Live, with her offering Trump the chance to do so. Now, as it happens, Trump was then later offered time at the end of a NASCAR race for 60-second messages free of charge. Meanwhile, Carr has been vocal on his willingness to punish, Trump that is, has been vocal on his willingness to punish American TV networks over what he has called biases. Carr poses the possibility that the FCC could soon, in the words of its critics, become a political weapon for the GOP.
Another name floating around is James Braid, the former J.D. Vance staffer, who has been bandying about as a possible director of legislative affairs. Per Bloomberg, quote, Braid has worked in Vance's Senate office as deputy chief of staff and also worked for the Office of Management and Budget during Trump's first term. If officially named to serve as the White House's congressional liaison, he'll be charged with pushing Trump's legislative agenda on Capitol Hill. And we are receiving word, the Hill has reported, based on one source, that Lutnick will be the pick, not Besant. So that would show, again, the influence of Elon Musk, given that that is his preference. I don't know that much about either individual, but there you have it.
Yeah.
The Hill reports it will be Lutnick.
Yeah, I don't know enormous amounts about either of them or the other people who had been in the frame. Obviously, if it is Lutnick, that is, a member of the Trump transition who had been said to be aggravating Trump a bit by purportedly publicity-seeking habits. I do think it's interesting that for the post of Treasury Secretary, the more colourful and controversial names did not really come into the frame for this one. That may speak to the fact that Trump takes the economy almost more seriously, I think, than anything else, and that there is less of an appetite, even on his part, for a sort of technicolor controversialist than of the type that he has chosen for other roles. So we shall see whether that pays off or not.
So Brendan Carr for the FCC, that is someone I know a decent amount about. I've met him before. I've spoken with him. Important to note, he was already part of the FCC. This is an appointment to lead the FCC. He recently was in the news because he was outspoken about the Kamala SNL appearance. He gave commentary subsequently on Fox News that should be looked into to see if it's a violation of the equal time rule. He did not assert that it was definitively a violation of the equal time rule, just that it deserved further scrutiny. He's an opponent of net neutrality. He does, however, support some tweaks or changes to Section 230. And I agree with him that censorship, to the extent the federal government is participating in censorship schemes, that is bad. Obviously, major communications companies are, to some degree, and should be subjected to the regulations of the federal government. I would like those to be as hands-off as possible, and I'm not sure to what extent he agrees with that. There is the whole break up big tech sort of philosophy that became, for a while, very dominant on the right in addition to the left. But then I think when all the revelations came out that so much of the bad moderation and censorship behavior was actually motivated by pressure from federal agencies, that that sentiment died off a little bit, although it still does exist to some degree on the right. Josh Hawley and J.D. Vance remain major proponents of massive new regulations on large media companies that they think are unfriendly to conservatives. So it'll be interesting to see that ideological battle play out at places like the FCC and other branches of the government.
Yeah, I'm genuinely interested in this, and I don't know and have never met Mr. Carr, so I can't speak to that respect. But one of the things that puzzles me about this element of the right, which you're more familiar with, is whether it is anti-censorship or anti-opinions it doesn't like. I mean, there is this argument of, you know, Elon's famous free speech warrior thing, and then it seemed to be clear that there were certain opinions that he didn't like that were at least deprioritized to some extent on that platform. In relation to Mr. Carr, so he seems to say, to the point about Section 230, he doesn't agree with you on that, right? I mean, you're more hands-off.
I would not change. I think changing it will get worse outcomes.
Right.
I mean, look, Section 230 is a law. It could be changed by the legislature. Like, it doesn't. It's not baked into. It's not sacred to us the way the First Amendment or something really is probably sacred. Like, if Congress wanted to revisit it, they could change. What it is, you know, I've talked about this on the show a lot, but it's a liability shield for internet companies that. If you write something on Facebook, if you write something on X, if you write something in the comments of YouTube, and it's libelous, you can be sued, but the platform can't. That is, and some conservatives will describe, or even some on the left, will describe that as a special perk that internet companies get that no other company gets. And they're not totally wrong about that. That is their most compelling argument, because a book publisher, you could, you know, if I write something that's libelous in a book that Simon & Schuster published, you can sue me and you can sue Simon & Schuster. If I write something libelous at Reason Magazine, you can sue me and Reason Magazine. But if I write it on Facebook, you can only sue me, you can't sue Facebook. So that allows internet companies to grant greater, more freewheeling and open than other platforms. Now, I would say that's a good thing. The argument conservatives, probably Brendan Carr, I don't know exactly what his argument is, but that I've heard from other conservatives, certainly from like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and J.D. Vance, is that, well, if they're going to get this special privilege, this immunity from liability, then in order to deserve that, they need to not moderate content in an ideologically unfair way. Now, under the current law, they can moderate content in whatever ideologically unfair they want. That's not in the current law. It doesn't say you only get this protection if you do X, Y, and Z. So sometimes I hear that misunderstanding. They say, well, this is premised on them not moderating in an unfair way. No, no, no. It specifically gives them this no matter what they do. Yep. So they could change the law to say in order to qualify for this protection, for this immunity from liability, you have to satisfy a bunch of criteria. I don't think that's...
Sorry to interrupt you, that would be people like Ted Cruz would be the arbiters of what the criteria of neutrality was, though, no?
Yes, and how the argument I use against conservative, when I say we shouldn't revisit this, is it won't be just Ted Cruz. It will be a commission of Ted Cruz and Elizabeth Warren, and you will end up Democrats are so eager, you know, I'm trying to convince conservatives. Sure. Democrats will be eager to sink their teeth into this law and craft into it more reasons for social media companies to have to take down speech, and that this will not benefit conservatives whatsoever. Now, I think there are some tweaks you could make to Section 230 to make the internet a healthy place. For instance, there are existing exceptions for sexually abusive material. They do have some responsibility to take that down. Criminal material, you could, for instance, have stronger protections for revenge porn, for posting other people's, if it's underage, they have to do something about it. Right. But if it's not underage, under existing law, they actually don't have to do anything. Yeah. You can scream into the internet that your nude photos are out there, and they don't have to do anything about it. They probably will, but they don't have to. Could you change the law to say, like copyright infringement, they have to take something down? Yes, and I would be in favor of that. But revisiting the subject at all will create an opportunity for legislators to, I think, gut existing protections for free speech.
No, I just think, I mean, we'll probably return to this topic some other time because there's so much to talk about within it. I just personally find it quite peculiar that in that Trump MAGA world, and I know you're not a huge defender of the President-elect, but in that world, there are lots of people who portray themselves as crusaders for free speech, while Trump is arguing that, like, CBS should lose its broadcast license for saying things that are displeasing to him. That seems a completely inconsistent position.
Yeah, that's not the way I would go. I mean, whatever the laws are regarding equal time and such things should be applied equally to both sides. And if I was to defend the conservative perspective or the MAGA perspective, I'd say they feel like all of these systems and laws, or many of them, have been used against conservatives but not used against liberals, and so it's very much well, now we control them and we will use them against liberals. And I'm saying, it's a textbook Lord of the Rings sort of argument. No, Boromir says we must use the ring against Sauron. Now we have it in our possession. But no, you can never use the ring. You must destroy it in the fires of Mount Doom, where I hope many restrictions on our free speech go to die.
I have nothing to add to that.
Well, we've got a lot more to talk about today on Rising. Please stay tuned and keep watching. President-elect Donald Trump confirmed on Monday he plans to mobilize the U.S. military to carry out mass deportations. He announced it in a Truth Social post, writing simply, quote, "It's true." Trump was responding to a Truth Social post the president of the conservative group Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton, made earlier this month that said, quote, "Good news. Reports are the incoming Donald Trump administration prepared to declare a national emergency and will use military assets to reverse the Biden invasion through a mass deportation program." Now, his newly appointed border czar, Tom Homan, doubled down on the use of military. Here he is on Fox News Business Monday night. Let's watch.
Well, first of all, DOD's helped several administrations to secure the border, Republican and Democrat. DOD will be used, if we have an agreement from DOD, the president has to make that decision. But if we use DOD, then they'll be used to do non-enforcement duties, such as transportation, whether it's on ground or air, infrastructure building, intelligence. Things that would take a badge and gun and ICE officer that are doing these type of duties, takes them away from those duties, put them on the street, and let the military do those duties, because it doesn't require immigration authorities.
Approximately 11 million undocumented immigrants are currently living in the United States. A deportation of this scale stands to impact roughly 20 million families. According to reports, Trump's team is looking to craft executive orders that could withstand legal challenges similar to those that delayed his 2017 Muslim ban. The ACLU, for its part, is preemptively suing the agency in charge of immigration. According to Axios, the ACLU is seeking records on how ICE air operations could be expanded to carry out a deportation and detention program that could ensnare millions of undocumented, or illegal if you prefer, immigrants.
Reactions from all sides of the immigration issue have been circulating on social media. Democratic Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar posted, quote, "Donald Trump plans to declare a national emergency and utilize the Alien Enemies Act to conduct mass deportations. This xenophobia and cruelty shouldn't be allowed in America. We are going to fight it every step of the way." Chair of the Ron Paul Liberty Report, Chris Rossini, is not a fan of using the military because he says, quote, "The issue is the precedent that it sets. We don't want the military on our streets. I particularly don't want a future leftist president declaring a national emergency and sending in the troops. Such a president may not be so concerned with legality and justice." Conservative social media personality Tim Young, on the other side, posted, quote, "If your abuelita is here illegally, it's time to go back home." Right-wing account Wall Street Maverick posted, quote, "We want so many deportations that we never have to press #1 for English again."
In other immigration news, according to reports, Haitian families are fleeing Springfield, Ohio. The town was put on the map following false claims of pet-eating Haitians perpetuated by Trump and others on the right. According to NBC News, residents there fear that they could be targeted in Trump's mass deportation plan.
So let's get into it. This is something that Trump made no secrets that he wanted to do. I would say that he ran explicitly on a platform of dealing with massive illegal immigration on a massive scale. No one who voted for Trump should be surprised that he wants to carry this out to deport illegal immigrants. I would say that there is a certain amount of tension between wanting to downsize the federal government, which I think is a good thing, and using the military to surveil Americans on such a level that we would root out the 12 million or more people who are here illegally. My compromise position, if the White House is listening to me, would be because the aspects of illegal immigration that have so frustrated Americans are the crime problem. So yes, we should absolutely dedicate more resources toward, work harder to keep American streets safe and get rid of illegal immigrants who have committed other crimes, robbery, violence for certain. We should deal with them, get them off our streets, get them out of here. We should also work toward a model where the immigrants coming into America are not mobbing the social services system. Again, this was a criticism even in Springfield, where those are not illegal immigrants and they were welcomed into Springfield and they helped stimulate the economy, but there was some swamping of the local social services. We're not prepared to deal with this influx. That has annoyed Americans, and so that must be addressed. That could be best addressed through creating, making it easier for people to come here legally and be vetted and work. And that would, I think, cause Americans not to be so irritated by illegal immigration. I don't think deporting Abuelita I don't think Americans at the end of the day will want to see it. And if you are in favor of that, you have to think, okay, do you want to show your papers to prove you're not an Abuelita? Do you want to go through airport-style security? Do you want, you get pulled over by the police, you want to show your immigration documents to prove you're not here illegally? I don't think so. Right. Americans, rightly, correctly, we rebelled from you Brits. I know you're from. I know you're Irish, but
so don't worry about it.
You know what I mean. We rejected this level of tyranny 200 plus years ago, and I don't think we want to see it again. I think when push comes to shove, people would be quite annoyed about a mass military surveillance plot to root out illegal immigrants. But there is a problem, and it should be dealt with seriously in terms of lawbreakers and social services being depleted. That would be my stance.
There is no doubt that Trump ran on immigration in a big way, and it was one of his major issues, and it was one of his major electoral advantages. Every single poll showed he was favored by a big margin over Kamala Harris in that respect. The difficulty, I think, is the rubber is now about to meet the road, because your compromise that you articulated there isn't one that Trump agrees with. He contends that he is going to try to deport everybody and carry out the largest mass deportation in American history. And what you get, as you so often get with Trump, is now a situation where the slogan or the grand sort of war cry has been repeated lots of times, and people are about to find out what it in fact means. Now, for example, there are, according to the American Immigration Council, more than 6 million US citizen children who have a family member who is an undocumented or illegal immigrant. Are people ready for that level of disruption? Apparently, one American family in 25 has an undocumented or illegal immigrant member. That level of disruption, and to your point, then you have the additional issue of using the military in a way that would be, I think, oppressive in many people's eyes. Certainly if it is not focused on people guilty and provably guilty of the absolute worst crimes. That doesn't mean that I'm an open borders guy or that people who raised reservations to this are open borders people. It's that this is a massive operation that they're talking about that I think is likely to have many, many unintended consequences.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know what Trump, well, I know what Trump thinks about it. However, shadow President Elon Musk has said repeatedly that he's for legal immigration. He's a legal immigrant himself. Yep. And legal immigration is fine because we need people to come here and work and build things, and labor is a resource just like any other. And if you arbitrarily cut off or ban or put tariffs on or make more difficult to get an important and vital resource, what happens? The price of things goes up. The number one concern, in addition to immigration, of American voters in this election cycle was the high price of everything. And look, I would say to those people, again, I understand your concerns about illegal immigration. I share them. We need to take care of that. We need to fix the crime problem. We need to make sure the school system and the medical system is not overrun by people we had no way to facilitate or know how many we're getting. The people in New York are so fed up with, I've come to understand, hotels just being occupied by illegal immigrants this is being provided to them at taxpayer expense. That is all. I understand the frustration, but we want to make it so they can come here and work, so we don't have the price of everything get so out of whack, which it will be impacted by if you've snapped your fingers and made disappear all immigrant labor, you would get you would get more expensive things, and people don't want that. It's
Well,
just true.
well,
Just like if you snapped your finger and got rid of all the lumber, or all the steel, or all the corn, or all the bricks, or whatever resources we're trading in Settlers of Catan, like, it would not be good for the U.S. economy.
Right, but I mean, I think that goes to the point that I frequently come back to on Trump, which is his tendency to advance these pithy, politically popular slogans that actually don't make a lot of sense or are difficult to implement or would have all sorts of counterproductive effects. And when it comes to immigration, look, it is obviously a problem if you have 11 to 12 million people in the country who are not authorized to be there. I have never been among those on the more liberal side who've argued that that isn't an issue. But I also think that Trump scapegoats those people for all sorts of problems that isn't really anything to do with them, and exaggerates the level of crime. Not that any level of crime is good for someone who shouldn't be in the country in the first place, but seeks to demagogue the issue in a way that isn't really grappling with the needs of the immigration.
And I would also say on crime, look, I have become, having lived in D.C. now for 10 plus years, continuously, and I lived here on and off before that, I have certainly become more cognizant of the crime problem in major American cities, and more willing, even as a libertarian who wants to like defund every agency there is, I've certainly become more willing to put money and muscle behind police power to correct crime problems in cities or wherever they occur in America. So I am clear-eyed about that. It is not the case that immigrants or illegal immigrants even, are disproportionately the cause of our crime problem. I mean, you can look at the 100+ murders that occurred in D.C. last year, the year before. It was a giant spike in violent crime, in homicide in the nation's capital. It's not immigrants. It's not illegal immigrants. It's people who are born here. It's poor, disproportionately black people from underprivileged areas of the city. Many of them young. Who impacted negatively by COVID, or also just mentally ill people who are released and out on the streets when they need to be in asylums or something. That's the problem. Quasi-vagrant acting out teenagers of any ethnicity, but from disproportionately bad or underprivileged backgrounds, which tend to be black, or insane people who are drug addicted and need to be on medicine and those kinds of things. It's not disproportionately an illegal immigrant problem, and I want it dealt with. But the illegal immigrants, there are illegal immigrants committing crimes. Don't get mistaken. And every time it happens, they end up headlining every conservative news site there is. But that's not the entire problem.
I think what I have to do here, Robby, in my important role, is to move you from. You've started to move from your libertarian position to wanting more funding of police. Mm-hmm. And I think what I have to do is move you further down that line to suggest that actually the difficulty in many of those communities and geographical areas, particularly in the District of Columbia, is marginalization, poverty, dysfunction, the legacy of racism, and all of those things. And that's where we should be applying our muscle to deal with the causes rather than the symptoms of these problems.
I mean, I want to deal with the causes, not against dealing with the causes, but it's a broken windows problem. The broken windows, they say it's a fallacy, but it has, as far as I can tell, a certain amount of underlying truth to it. That if you neglect the proper policing of underprivileged neighborhoods, you make the problem worse. And the people who live there want good police. They don't want over-policing. They don't want, stop and frisk where everyone who looks a certain way just gets automatically suspected and searched. I don't favor that at all. But it was very telling to me. I mean, I discovered this for the first time when there's a riot or so over some police brutality episode with George Floyd, or before that with all the various other ones that occurred, and then there's some riot and something burns down, and then journalists, when they interview the people who live in that area, they say, well, no, we don't want rioting. We want good, sane policing. People are entitled to good, sane police services, and they're entitled to have their neighborhoods free of mentally ill and drug addicted people on the street. You don't have society at all on some level if you just let. It's not healthy for those people either. Right. I'm not saying they need to all be in prison, but they need medical.
I'm proposing mass incarceration.
No, but people who are mentally ill and drug addicted and in the streets and danger to themselves and to others need to be in mental health rehabilitation.
No, they don't.
It can't just come and go as they please. They need to have to take their medicine.
No, I know, but the problem, and I'm not saying you're making this argument,
Yeah.
but the problem I have a lot of times when crime is discussed is that it can be defined as a pathology of individual or groups of people, whereas I think it is the consequence of social causes, be that impoverishment, be that dysfunction, be that lack of opportunity. Those are the things that create the soil from which crime and other problems spring.
I think I agree with that. More to come on Rising today. Please stay tuned. We'll discuss it right after this. Disgraced music mogul Sean Diddy Combs is facing more scrutiny. Federal prosecutors have accused Combs of witness tampering from behind bars. He's in jail. The prosecution filed another motion on Friday urging the judge to not grant bail to the hip-hop star. They say he deployed a, quote, relentless effort to contact potential witnesses, including victims of his abuse, who could provide powerful testimony against him. And he's doing that, again, from behind bars. Now, for context, Combs was arrested, charged in September with sex trafficking, racketeering, and transportation to engage in prostitution.
According to the latest filing, Combs is accused of using other inmates' phone access codes, those are known as PAC numbers, to contact several people from behind bars, including his sons. He's also accused of making three-way calls to get a hold of people and using a third-party service called Contact Me ASAP to contact unauthorized individuals, presumably ASAP. Though much of the prosecutor's claims have been redacted from the court filing, they claim clear interference with the intent to blackmail victims and witnesses into staying quiet. Combs' defense insists the prosecution's case is thin and the mogul should be released from jail and put under home detention with 24/7 monitoring, plus, quote, near total restrictions on Combs' ability to contact anyone aside from his defense team. Here was Diddy telling Conan O'Brien about his, quote, freakouts back in 2002.
Okay, now, we need alcohols.
Right.
Alcohols.
Right. Not just one alcohol.
Alcohols.
Right, just
Plurals.
different blend. You need
Blends.
the ladies, you need the booze.
You need some water.
For watering plants? What?
No, I don't know if guys have noticed this, like, a lot of ladies drink water at parties. They
Right.
just, so you have, if you don't have what they need, they're gonna leave.
Right.
Gotta
right.
keep them there.
Right.
You need locks on the doors.
Okay, this is sounding kind of dangerous now.
It's a little kinky, but
Yeah.
rock with me, but just
Right.
check it out. You need a lot of heat. A lot of heat. Yeah.
Heat. You mean that physically the place has to be hot?
You don't have no air conditioning.
No air conditioning.
No.
Why is that?
Heat affects the alcohol, and it also affects, like, everybody gets a little bit more comfortable and loose. Builds up a nice little sweat.
That just sounds disgusting. What are you talking about?
Depends on the way you look at it.
Depends. Oh, people
Yeah.
start getting it gets kind of sexy. Is that what you're saying?
There you sex.
We're not laughing now. Diddy's trial is scheduled for May 2025.
Well, I mean, on the surface, if the prosecutor's claims are true, this seems like pretty much textbook witness tampering, right? I mean, it appears to be an effort to either, in some cases, intimidate witnesses from testifying against him, or there have been other reports of sort of inducing people to make statements in his defense. There was some allegation that in one instance this was a statement that he, in essence, dictated or drafted with a woman who made a statement that was attempting to rebut one of the accusers, I believe, in a civil case against him. I mean, witness tampering is bad. The things that Sean Combs is accused of are terrible. He pleads his innocence. The justice system will presumably work its way through.
I'm always struck by how people, he's locked up, he's behind bars, and he's still able to get his hands on a cell phone. He was using three-way calling with other inmates to get a hold of potential witnesses against him in order to, that's what the report said, in order to, pressure them not to testify. You can get cell phones behind bars. Routinely we hear reports, drugs are in prison. Actually, that's what I wanted to say. Yeah, for all the people who think drugs should be banned and like we just need more, more state power to brought to bear, we can't even keep contraband out of prisons. Like the most policed, where there's actually screening, and you could do airport security style stuff everywhere, and you still wouldn't keep contraband. And in fact, contraband gets through at airport security all the time as well. When they test it, knives get through, etc. It's really neither here nor there. It just speaks to the incredible power of human ingenuity to find workarounds, even when the government is trying really hard to suppress or ban something. Keep that in mind.
No, I mean, that may well be true. I mean, it's just in Diddy's case that ingenuity appears to be being utilized.
Yeah, harnessed for evil. I'm not marveling and going, wow, that's so amazing, but...
No, exactly. I mean, it seems to be harnessed for intimidatory purposes, allegedly. No, he of course, denies that. I think that in relation to his case, you know, Cassie, his former partner, was the one who came forward initially, made very serious allegations against him, and that, in effect, opened the floodgates to enormous numbers of allegations. It is possible, theoretically, that all those allegations are somehow false or people bandwagoning, but it appears to me, on a basic human level, unlikely that there would be quite such a plethora of detailed allegations. That's a lot of smoke if there really is no fire.
Yes, it is likely that there is some underlying truth to at least some of the allegations. There might be a lot of underlying truth to a lot of the allegations. There's probably some bandwagoning going on. We spoke to an attorney who's for one of the alleged victims of Diddy a few weeks ago. I believe Amber Nomiki and I did, and you know, they said they had calls, they had information, they had people, hundreds of them, come forward. They're not going to represent all of them. They're, you know, which ones have evidence that can be compelling. What are the best cases to bring that? I also saw a story in the New York Post. This is from a week ago about Diddy stuff that I wanted to read the headline of. Woman claims she saw minors dressed as Harajuku Barbies at Sean Diddy Combs' freak-off parties, what he was describing there to Conan so many years ago. Said these were sex-fueled parties with what she initially thought were little people dressed as Japanese Barbies. And she said, this is her talking to TMZ, are those midgets? And she actually thinks they were kids dressed up in sexy. Oh, gross. So, again, that's just from someone who provided this information to TMZ for a documentary. Yeah. But pretty disgusting
It is. No, that's just vile stuff.
Way too much underage sexual content discussion going on here in the news today.
It's just
absolutely vile.
Awful stuff.
Yeah. For sure. All right, coming up next, we're going to look at the situation in Ukraine and Russia. Russia vowing that the ability of Ukraine to fire U.S.-supplied long-range weaponry into Russia itself is an escalation that they are not taking very kindly to. We'll talk about that with Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis coming up next. News is breaking that Ukraine fired U.S.-made long-range missiles into Russia earlier today. Now, this comes just 2 days after President Joe Biden lifted his so-called red line against these weapons being used by Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky. The timing has raised eyebrows as President-elect Trump has said he seeks a swift end to the Ukraine war. His Vice President-elect J.D. Vance has acknowledged that Russia might keep some of the territory it has occupied as part of any peace settlement.
Meanwhile, Russian leader Vladimir Putin has responded. He announced that he was lowering the threshold for a nuclear strike. Russia had been warning the West for months that if Washington allowed Ukraine to fire US, British and French missiles deep into Russia, Moscow would consider those NATO members to be directly involved in the war in Ukraine. Here with us to unpack this perilous situation is Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, a foreign policy and defense expert. Lieutenant Colonel, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So just to get us started here with the top lines, so to speak, what do you make of these latest developments? What should we make of them? What is their significance?
This is one of the most puzzling and potentially catastrophic decisions of this 3-year war that the United States has been helping Ukraine wage. I'll just tell you categorically, there is no chance that long-range missiles being able to be used by Ukraine now will have any impact whatsoever on the tactical fight. It will not slow down Russia's advance. It will not help Ukraine have a chance to reverse course. All it will do is potentially escalate this war into drawing in the United States and possibly NATO into a war. and raises for the first time to maybe to the highest level since the fall of 2022, the possibility of nuclear escalation. And it is just, I think, irresponsible of the current administration, even by their own announcements and by their own claims. This is not going to change the outcome of the war. Then why would you want to risk nuclear escalation on the threshold of handing over to an incoming administration that says they want to reach a negotiated settlement to end it?
How would you respond to the argument defenders of this are making? They, I think, are saying, well, we've authorized this action to induce Russia to be more willing to negotiate because they could be damaged by these attacks, not damaged in a way to harm the Russian military or government or stem the actual, change the course of battle, yes, but to make Russia want to end this headache sooner. That's, I think, the argument they're making. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's either the most extraordinary level of naivete or arrogance that's way beyond the pale, and that's really saying something for Washington, D.C. I've seen any number of general officers make that very argument over the last 48 hours or so. And I got to say, have you not paid any attention over the last nearly 3 years of this war, or over the last, say, I don't know, couple of centuries of Russian history? It is beyond ridiculous to suggest that a handful of long-range missiles is somehow going to make Putin change his calculation at this point when everything in the world is on Russia's side. They have the manpower advantages, decisive. They have the defense industrial base advantages that are decisive. They have allies that are really producing lots of ammunition and weapon systems that Russia uses. There is no capacity left on the Ukraine side to even hold on to what they have, much less ever reverse it. So there is no chance that it's going to cause Russia to do that, and it's almost insulting to suggest otherwise.
But if you take the view, which I think you said in your response there, that everything in the world is on Russia's side right now, then does the United States just do nothing and let Russia roll on? I mean, what if you take the view that the momentum is with the Russians, the permission to use long-range missiles does not stop or slow that momentum, then what does one do except reconcile oneself to Ukraine's defeat?
See, those who make that kind of argument imply, and that's why I said a minute ago with the arrogance issue, that there's actually a choice to make. This war is practically fundamentally over. The end is already known. The only thing that's a question is how long it's going to drag out, how many more Ukrainian men are going to die, how much more territory will be lost. The most sane, wise, and moral position that the United States could take now is to end this war at the best terms possible at the negotiating table. Ignoring that fact and ignoring that possibility and clinging to this fiction that just one more silver bullet type weapon is going to somehow change Russian actions, all it does is condemn the people that we care about the most, the Ukrainian people, to more suffering and destruction. I think it's reprehensible when people make that argument.
Can we talk to Vladimir Putin when Trump gets into office and structure some kind of peace settlement that does not involve more Ukrainian territory falling into Russian hands? Is that something you think Vladimir Putin could go for?
It's a dicey situation at this time. I'll just tell you, while I'm a big advocate of Trump coming in and doing exactly what he said he would do on the campaign trail, I mean, everybody needs to keep a sober understanding that he's got a weak hand to negotiate with. Trump's a great negotiator and businessman. That's how he made his name. But you also have to have assets to be able to have a good negotiation. And then right now, all the big cards are in Russia's hand because they can say, no, if you don't give me everything I want. And remember, on June 14th, Putin said that he wanted all 4 of the oblasts that they had annexed. Well, if you look at the map, Ukraine still has some of those positions, especially in the Kherson and the Zaporizhia oblasts. So Putin is saying, you have to give up more territory than I've already taken, or I'll just keep fighting and take everything that I want. That's the problem, is that if we don't negotiate and do something like that can bring this to an end, we may end up losing even more and more people. That's the hard situation that Trump's going to be in.
Yeah,
I take the point about the weak hand. I mean, I think that's a completely plausible argument. I'm just curious, though, I mean, should we then make no effort to strengthen the Ukrainian hand? Because getting back to the point of the long-range missiles, I don't think anyone really thinks that is going to transform the battlefield calculus to such an extent that Ukraine is going to romp to victory. But I think the argument, and Robby alluded to this earlier, is that it permits the Ukrainians to hold on to the territory that you've mentioned, some in the Kursk region, that would strengthen their hand for negotiation. You don't obviously see it that way, right?
It doesn't. It doesn't strengthen their hand. That's what these generals that I've seen, it just frustrate me to no end, because they claim that it can, but it can't. And if you need any more proof, all you have to do is look at the last 24 months of Russia's long-range missile campaign, to include just 24, or I guess about 48 hours ago was the latest round, where they have near impunity to strike all over the Ukrainian land. Ukraine has very limited air defense, in some places none whatsoever, and Russia is just hitting all of these energy systems, command and control, ammunitions depots, etc., at will. And they've been doing it for 2 years. Ukraine has a fraction of the number of missiles. If we give them everything that we have into a much, much larger Russian country that has good air defense systems, apparently all 6 of the ATACMS that were fired overnight were all shot down, and only one of them apparently hit part of its target. We have no confirmation of that part yet. But you see that Russia has been doing this exact campaign of long-range strikes, and it has never brought Ukraine to its knees by itself. Unless you have a comprehensive situation, long-range missiles, and a coherent and a strong ground force that can also put pressure to bear, this one element will not strengthen anybody's hand. It's just not true.
I know you're a military analyst, not a political pundit, but in trying to process why the Biden administration has now taken this position that, yeah, sure, fire long-range missiles into Russia, I wonder if it's an effort to make things more difficult for Trump out of spite or something to bring about an end to this conflict, because it seems like all of the military advisors, even on our side, are saying that this war can't be reasonably won by Ukraine. Is this a last-ditch effort to complicate peace efforts actually in the region?
Well, I do have some insider information on what some of the people in the Trump world are thinking about this, but I don't have any such access whatsoever to the Biden administration, so I could only speculate. But what I can tell you authoritatively is that it will greatly complicate things for the Trump administration, which I think is a real travesty, because at least in part, he was elected because of his stance on ending this Russia-Ukraine war. And a lot of people voted because that's what they want to see, too. They don't want to see another forever war that's being supported year after year for no apparent purpose and with no success. And so now here's Trump coming in, and he's, again, signaling very clearly he's going to do exactly what he said during the campaign. But now all of a sudden, there's a chance that Russia could escalate this before we get in there, especially if they hit something sensitive in any future rounds of strikes.
And you've been warning for weeks, months, years, in fact, on our program and elsewhere that this course of action undertaken by Biden to support militarily the Ukraine resistance and to an unlimited degree was going to result in exactly the situation we find ourselves in presently. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Robby.
President-elect Donald Trump made a triumphant return to Madison Square Garden less than 3 weeks after his first rally. He was accompanied by his crew, Elon Musk, Speaker Mike Johnson, RFK Jr., and a few other politicos. Now, Trump's first UFC appearance since winning the election yielded thunderous applause and this. Love Trump's moves. Now, following the event, UFC President Dana White had some raging words for MSM and politicians. White said this at the UFC 309 press conference.
So I've had this philosophy for the last 5 years that traditional media is dead, and it doesn't hold the influence that it used to hold. The two most hated people in this world right now are the media and the politicians. Nobody trusts them, and nobody believes them. And the true influence right now is with these kids that are on the internet, and they're called influencers. So I've been creating relationships with these people over the last, like I said, 4 or 5 years. And This election was won on the internet. Fucking
Dana.
The way Power Slap was built is the way this election was won. And the Hispanic vote was incredibly powerful. The male black vote and the youth. The youth all came out.
Mainstream media is struggling to survive. A new study from Pew Research reveals that news influencers played a big part in influencing voters in the 2024 election. The report finds 1 in 5 Americans say they regularly get news from influencers on social media. 85% of the so-called news influencers are found on X, 50% on Instagram, 44% on YouTube. The majority, 63%, are men, and most, 77%, have no affiliation or background with a news organization. This was also a point I saw made by Puck News this morning. A bunch of polling data that does not look great for Democrats, that most voters do approve of the Trump transition so far. The GOP is more popular at the moment than the Democratic Party, and that podcasts did absolutely boost Trump. Only 12% of voters are willing to pay for news.
You know, look, there are two separate strands to this argument, I think. One is traditional media struggling and or in crisis? And it is certainly struggling. I don't think there's really any dispute about that.
It's not dead, but it's in crisis.
Exactly. And there has been a breakdown of trust over a long period of time, decades, in fact, that has contributed to that. There are other issues that you and I have talked about previously with the business model. I suppose the question or the caveat that I would have around this is when influencers or the general dispersal of news information is discussed, it often tends to be discussed in a very positive way. It's like, oh, fantastic, these people are arising to supplant the old decrepit giants of traditional media. And is what is coming better or not? Or do people like Dana White like it because those people can be more easily sort of more supportive of whatever they believe in? I think that there is a real danger that if you surrender any sense of gatekeepers, yes, you let fresh voices in, but you also let a lot of crap and nonsense in, and that's, I think, the danger in that.
That is the danger, that now the dominance of the mainstream media is broken, and so anyone can call themselves a journalist or a news person. I always try to tell other people in the media that I think often mainstream media people take a dismissive view of what influencers or whatever content creators. Sorry, we're no better than them.
No,
we are doing the exact same. We are all descendants of the bard and the minstrel, the person who strums his lyre in the court of whoever and entertains the king and tries not to get his
Trump moves while you're playing your lyre.
Exactly.
See how that works out.
That's all we are. Is we're telling stories to entertain people. Yeah. We are no better than jugglers. Now we try to tell the truth and entertain people with actual news and information and a little bit of comedy and color. I think my favorite, independent content creator type people actually are people who used to be journalists or used to work for mainstream journalistic publications and are now on their own and that are better to have been unleashed. The people I read most reliably, like I read everything they write, is Nate Silver, Matt Iglesias, some Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald, people who came from institutions and are now mostly on Substack. The decline in institutions has meant that people who are good journalists, I think, often don't want to suffer from brand association with a large place that employ, say the Washington Post, which employs a lot of great and talented journalists, but also employs people, I think, totally bought into the Russian narrative about Hunter Biden and all sorts of other, Jen Rubin, Philip Bump, to name names, people I don't respect very much, and maybe other people don't want to be tarnished by associates. They also employ Megan McArdle, who I really like. It's all over the place, and you used to just take the good with the bad, but now there's so much option, you can just choose to take the good. But also the younger content creator generation is doing some really interesting and innovative things with news presentation, with video. We can always learn a lot from them. I was learning a lot from Jessica Burbank when we had her on because she just totally came out of a TikTok world to do really interesting economic news delivery and comedy, and she does costumes and all that sort of thing. It's cool.
She never induced you to wear a costume or dance for whatever TikToks, as far as I'm aware.
I think over on Breaking Points, Sagar and Crystal, or Sagar at least wears a costume on Halloween Day. I do like that tradition.
Making some contribution to it. Look, I think, a lot of things that we talk about in the media can actually be boiled down very simply. One could make the point I'm about to make about Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, who we were talking about earlier. Just a lot depends on whether you approach the thing with basic intellectual honesty or not. And that can be somebody on TikTok, it can be somebody on MSNBC, or anywhere in between. And some people, I think, fall down in that because either some of them are creating intentional misinformation, but also a lot of people are just playing the role of propagandists, really, which we really do try to avoid here, to get sucked into that thing of just reading off the party line on one thing or another. And I think that one of the optimistic things that I see in media and in the audience for media is an increasing market for some level of intellectual honesty rather than those people who are simply serving as mouthpieces for one political party. Right?
Well, and to platform debate and disagreement. This is something obviously we do on Rising, given the format of the show. It's something organizations like the Free Press, Barry Weiss's thing, are doing. They've done events where they have a big topic and they invite people on different sides to debate. I attended one where my bosses at Reason Magazine, the editors there, a libertarian publication, argued with someone from a socialist magazine about whether the capitalism is good, that kind of thing. And people really seem to respond well to just platforming actual debate, which you don't get a lot of debate anymore on both mainstream liberal media and conservative media. It's just, when I flip channels, oftentimes I'm like, oh, this is so boring. Oh my God, there is no one here to say, but wait, wouldn't the other side say blah? And then you go the other way and like, oh my God, this is propaganda too. And it's really boring and exhausting.
It is, and I think that trend has picked up pace quite markedly. Like, I have lived in the US for 20 years, thereabouts, and it used to be the case that there was more of that even in mainstream places.
Yes.
So, for when one can knock or not knock the late Alan Combs, who used to be on with Sean Hannity and Fox News Primetime, supplying a liberal voice of a kind. MSNBC used to have, Joe Scarborough used to be a conservative for a start, and had a show on MSNBC. Tucker Carlson had a show on MSNBC, which people don't really recall much anymore. So that sort of interplay between ideas, I think, has fallen off in mainstream places, but thankfully there has been more of a flowering of it in independent.
Yes, we're independent media that happens to be attached to a large corporate mainstream media institution.
We'll just take the praise for being independent and don't pay with the Trump dancing. I'm not doing a Trump dance under any circumstances. You have to draw the line.
It's all me. Good to have principles. That does it for us today on Rising. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. And we'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.